Hello everybody, my name is Hukka. I work with the practice of cripping. Työskentelen rampauttamisen käytäntöjen kanssa in the arts, in philosophy, practicing philosophy, teaching philosophy, and also in like training, education, facilitation, many things. Good to be here.
Yeah, my name's Luke, and I've just graduated from my master's in gender studies this spring from the University of Turku. My background is in philosophy, and I have taken from the gender studies degree lots of feminist philosophical inputs and also relational ethics perspectives.
Yeah, I have this nice timer for us, so maybe setting it now to 25, and then we can like conclude.
Yeah.
All right. I really like this. It's gonna make like a beeping sound, so please don't get scared. All right.
Okay.
So, as mentioned, we're here today to discuss allyship, liittolaisuus, particularly in feminist contexts. I would, however, like to suggest that we first do just a short check-in, okay? Each one of us with our body minds. So to challenge this disembodiment often going on in academic spaces, maybe some can relate, and also non-academic but theoretical spaces, to like have a couple of breaths and maybe check like, do I need anything? Do I need to go to the bathroom now? Like this presentation seems interesting, but maybe I just need to go. Or do I need something to drink? Do I need to switch seats? So just taking a moment to like, okay, where am I? What's going on? The microphone is loud?
Yeah.
Yes,
it's
super loud. Okay, yes.
Okay.
Can we do that, please? Okay, is it better? Testing. Is the volume good now? Okay,
I'm
thank you
also
so
gonna
much.
test my microphone. Okay.
We might get excited and
Yeah.
shout a bit, but let us know.
Thank you, Lasso.
Okay, we good to go? Yeah.
Good. Yeah. I think my microphone is maybe also a bit too loud still, but maybe it's okay. Check? Yeah, okay, good. So we talked in our preparation for this workshop that we really want to have it be a dialogue or a trialogue-based presentation on the topic of allyship and solidarity, and so here the form and the content go together because we very much conceptualize or we think through allyship and solidarity and unity and this broader complex as a very embodied practice, ongoing process, and less as a static state that can be achieved. And so we wanted to show also in our presentation that this is how we do the practice and not just present it. Yeah.
Thanks, that's great. Let's open with our first example, right?
Yes.
This is an example from the Finnish context, and we will speak some Finnish and then I will translate a bit. But the context of the example is that last year there was again organized this yearly shadow book fair, Varjokirjamessut, in Helsinki, which is like this autonomous book fair happening as an alternative to a commercial and the other kind of big book fair. And during this shadow book fair, there arose a lot of discussion on a writer's text and whether this text is suitable for the space in the shadow book fair, and there were like accusations of transphobia regarding this text. And this is Emilia Männynväli's Toiste en suostu katoamaan essay collection that we're talking about. And the organizers of the book fair eventually decided to cancel Männynväli's participation in the program because they have a whole statement you can see from their website where they have the grounds for why they did what they did, but basically they were worried about the space becoming transphobic if there was discussion about this book that discusses gender. So then Saara Särmä and Raisa Omaheimo a bit later published an interesting text in Tulva Feminist magazine, which we think is a very good example of this certain discourse on allyship. Se on hyvä esimerkki siitä, miten liittolaisuudesta puhutaan.
Yeah, so we're gonna read. I'm gonna act as Saara. Mietin myös, että Männynvälin essee tuntuu niin hankalalta, koska 2020-luvun feminismin ytimessä on liittolaisuus heikommassa asemassa olevien kohtaan tai moniperustaisen syrjinnän tunnistaminen ja purkaminen. Männynvälillä on aina mukana sukupuoli ja luokka, mutta muut asiat ei. Männynväli tässä esseessä rikkoo sanattoman sopimuksen liittolaisuudesta heittämällä transihmiset bussin alle, vaikka yrittääkin välillä sanoa, ettei sitä tee.
Tuo oli hyvin sanottu. Minun oli pitkään tosi vaikea saada kiinni siitä, mikä minua tässä niin kovasti satuttaa, mutta nyt tajuan, että se oli tuo liittolaisuudesta irtisanoutuminen. Kun se on se keskeisin asia omassa feminismissä tai helvetti koko ihmisyydessä, solidaarisuus ja liittolaisuus. Tällaisena valkoisena, keskituloisena, akateemisena, sissukupuolisena feministinä sinulla ja minulla on ihan hirveä määrä kaikkea pääomaa, ja mielestäni siitä seuraa velvollisuus luoda tilaa, kuunnella, oppia ja väistää, jos tarvis. Mehän mietittiinkin pitkään puhelimessa, että voidaanko me kaksi edes kirjoittaa tästä esseestä julkisesti, että onko se muiden paikka kuin meidän. Mutta ajattelen kyllä, että nimenomaan liittolaispuheenvuoro me voidaan tästä pitää. To summarize in English, Saara says, at the core of this decade's feminism is allyship towards the people who are in a lesser position or recognizing multiple-based discrimination. Männynväli discusses class and gender, but not other things. I think Männynväli in this essay breaks the unspoken agreement of allyship by throwing trans people under the bus. And then Raisa says, I agree. I think what most hurts me in this essay is to refuse to be an ally. That to me is the most central part in feminism and whole humanity. As this white, middle-class, academic, cisgender feminist, you and I have so much capital, so I think it follows from that we have an obligation to create space, listen, learn, and give space. And then we thought, could we even write about this publicly? Is it someone else's thing? But then we thought, okay, we can do this allyship essay.
I think this is a good example of a kind of broader tendency, especially in feminist activist circles, where calls to allyship have become maybe more and more common. And of course they have emerged as a response to various societal power formations. So the aim is to kind of point out and reveal power relations that feminists want to identify, often in terms of gender, sexuality, race, racism, ability, and so on. But in this discourse, minority positions are often seen as vulnerable, and they are given precedence in a political struggle for change, where allies are defined as those being in a majority position and asked to show support, act through listening and learning, self-reflection, criticality also, being accountable, and of course taking action, but centering on marginalized identities and experiences and so on.
Yeah, and what is particularly interesting is these very contradictory shoulds and oughts, like these ethical moralizing demands, like, you're an ally, so shut up and listen, but also, you're an ally, silence is violence, you need to act and speak out.
Yeah. So I think in this talk we're interested in the dynamic of this kind of talk about allyship, what it produces, what it excludes, but also how we can think about allyship in its meaning of solidarity beyond this structural setup that often kind of constructs us-them polarizing dynamic.
Yeah, and sort of there are different strands related that we are kind of teasing out, or hopefully will tease out, related to what is in this dynamic. I'm maybe now going to jump in with the concept of agency, that the agency in this kind of talk is sort of unclear and also reduced, because on the one hand, in this conversation, then there's this, sometimes the agency is somehow divided between those who are in the marginal position and the allies who are supposed to somehow reduce their agency, or who are like in a majority position and are paradoxically are both told that they have a lot of agency and power, and then also that they should step back, but then also that they should use that power to enact these ally roles, ally practices, and there's this sort of sometimes in the text it's these unspoken rules, but clearly some form of rules that should be followed in their behavior, and there's a sense in which this is reductive of both the agency of the person in the minority position, because they become reinscribed with the victim position, with the reduced scope of agency, and then also it reduces the scope of the person who's supposed to be an ally, because there's then these rules to follow, instead of you are an agent and you're trying to meet another person, and you want to try to meet them as they are.
And I think, so in my own work, I've been interested in what I call epistemic habits, in especially queer and feminist contexts. And I think we can see that there has been this formation, especially in relation to white feminism, where of course the risks are also pointed out in this. So there is a call for solidarity and for action, but then there is a kind of the disclaimers and warnings about, how your allyship risks becoming performative, or where you risk centering your own whiteness, or being an ally somehow displays savior complex, and so on. So there is also this kind of odd tendency of actually reinforcing the kind of power structures that you want to dissolve. And I think, just to give one example of this, Nina9 recently translated Alison Phipps's British sociologist, kind of mainstream feminist book on Me Too politics, where she opens the book by saying that this book is not for black feminists and they don't need to read it, and with this kind of disclaimer that her whole project might fail. But paradoxically, the book kind of reinforces, it constructs white feminism as inherently bad and black feminism as inherently progressive. So it kind of really reinscribes this us and them setup, which I think has problematic effects in terms of, when we meet and start talking about these difficult questions around racism and white privilege. So we're already reduced to a certain kind of representation, which also relates to the previous talk about the kind of
I think it's important to say at this juncture that we are very much in favor of solidarity, and obviously deconstructing power formations and striving towards equality. So it's not that, but we are trying to point out that certain ways of talking about allyship and what it means to be in solidarity have these problematic tendencies.
Yeah, and to add to your point about the reduced or limited or somehow, I think there's this authoritarian tendency there towards the agency of the ally, that the ally is produced to be someone who needs to follow what the marginalized say, and this, like you kind of already talked about the knowledge production and epistemic habits, it has so many highly problematic consequences, I think, because it also gives a moral free pass, or like you become, as a moral agent, this moral free rider, because then you can always refer to something else, you can externalize. For example, I could be like, oh well, I as a white person don't need to deeply engage with what is racism and what is my actually part in the whole system. Instead I'm like, well, listen to BIPOC voices or whatever. And then the problem here is, of course, which voices? Do you mean billions of people in the world, or do you mean some specific? So this can also in itself become very essentializing, even racist to say, because you are lumping millions and millions of people into something that I would then refer to as the moral agent. So what do you think?
Well, I just get to think about this kind of, Eve Kostovsky-Sedgwick's work around kind of suspicious hermeneutics and this tendency to be kind of see certain power formations everywhere, and how that also colors our judgment. So in terms that, as white feminists, we also start policing each other and kind of blaming each other for failing to be good allies, which is paradoxical considering that our point of departure is to say okay, we live in a patriarchal, racist, colonial society, or we live among these structures and they affect all of us. But then when someone kind of shows that they have internalized, this point of view, then we're there to blame them and hold them personally responsible for changing the system. And I think that in itself, I'm not saying you shouldn't be responsible for what you say and think. Of course, everyone should. But I think in terms of care and being an ally, you also have to be able to critique people without reducing them to a representation of their whatever category they represent. So, and of course, I also want to add, I think we're all part of this, so it's not like we also haven't engaged in this kind of thinking that we're now trying to, that is the reason why we're critically reflecting on it. And I remember I was reading Maggie Nelson's essay on freedom, where she's talking about these kind of tendencies in the art world, and then I'm like, oh my god, she's critiquing Christina Sharp. There's a white feminist critiquing a black feminist work, and I realized it's so rare to see that in feminist academic scholarship, because we have, and I think Jennifer Nash talks about how speaking in the name of black feminism equals strong, what she calls strong agency. So, we all hail the work of Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde, and it also creates this kind of, so the black feminist becomes this figure that also Nash talks about, she becomes this savior figure that's going to save, the problems of white feminism. So,
Question. What do you mean by epistemic habits?
So I'm talking about certain kind of theoretical, methodological point of departure that have become so self-evident, so they're taken for granted. So for example, a Foucauldian understanding of power, how we talk about having to situate our knowledge. So objectivity is truth, objectivity, reality are concepts that aren't really engaged with because they are seen as constructions. And
I think one epistemic habit could be, in our example, also when, is it Sarah or Raisa?
I think it's
Raisa, who does this listing, what she would, and I would also call confessing your identities for this public, perhaps consumption and evaluation. Like, I am white, cis, middle class, kind of these, and then we understand where this situating oneself comes from, but what does it actually do, we think is the question that a critical approach to allyship and this politics of difference awakens.
Yeah, I think here, like from the kind of philosophical background, there's this, or I see it that there's a sort of tension between this third-person view of people, as in where we think of them as like he, she, they, versus the I and you relationship, where we see them as an individual that we're having a relationship. Like it's this outside view versus the more interpersonal view. And with these practices of constantly referring to, trying to be self-reflective of where you are in society, you're sort of at the same time trying to inhabit your first-person perspective and the third-person perspective of where you are as well. And this is from the point of view of trying to be an ethical actor. I think there's a problem, because if you're too preoccupied with constantly trying to reflect and inhabit yourself from the outside, then where are you in yourself from the inside? And if you need to inhabit yourself and your position also in order to engage with the other. And this is where I think we're coming from the more like Levinas and Simone Weil kind of relational ethics perspective of seeing, or for me at least, like in censoring the ethical encounter between myself and an other who's different from me. And then it's about negotiating these differences.
And would you say that one example of this, or like where this kind of first and third person approach comes visible is like this allyship becoming identity, right? Or what do you think?
Yeah, do you want to expand on the allyship as identity?
Yeah, maybe that we discussed when preparing that this current talk about allyship definitely is related to the current identity politics. And by identity politics, according to Cressida Hayes, I refer to kind of all contemporary political activity that is emphasizing and based on identification and these outspoken identities. So it can become this like, I have the identity of the marginalized knowledge producer, right? And then in the same movement, there are, the one that is not me, there is the ally. So it can, I think, even in some cases, create these like kind of identifications that would be, I think, the kind of third-person view into myself. Because why else would I think, if I partake in a political movement, then of course it's also my thing, whether it's anti-racist, anti-ableist, whatever, of course I'm there because it considers me, it considers all of us. We just have, of course, different positions regarding the matter. But so then starting to create these kind of oppositional identities of the ally and the agent, the oppressed. Do you have
I think so. I think something that comes to mind here is also that then wanting to become an ally and trying to inhabit the position of the ally becomes a way to be morally good in a way, so that then it's sort of a way out of having to engage with a lot of negative emotions that come with the knowledge that society is unequal and that you are profiting from certain unequal power structures. Because engaging with grief and shame and anger about these things is really difficult and complicated. And then it's easier to go, okay, I will be a good ally and I will make up for what it is that I am unfortunately engaged with, because we all are.
Myself.
Yes, and this also relates back to the agency point in the beginning, because of course none of us has the power to single-handedly change the inequality of society. There is no way to do that because you're just one individual. And then there's this, paradoxically, you're both trying to assume way more agency than you have by being a good ally, and you will do your part. And also, you're circumscribing what you can actually do when you encounter someone who's different. And this, like, for me, it always comes back to the encounter between myself and the other, that this is where the revolutionary part comes in.
Exactly. I just wanted to say, like, that, of course, I think that this is the only way, but in a sense, that is the way we can actually dissolve those structures, you know. And I think this is a really important point, that we can recognize and we can see how we're drawn into thinking in certain ways, acting in certain ways. You know, we all have our habits of our gendered habits, our racialized habits, of course. But then it's in these encounters where we can actually, you know, challenge those. And I think this is where we come to our kind of proposition of how to move beyond, where I think terms such as kindness and love are very central to how we relate to the other, even when the other is displaying all of these problematic aspects of being a sexist or racist or whatever. And here, of course, we're talking about the Christian concept of love as an attitude or a relationality to not the other, but I mean in some way to life in itself. Like what is your relation to, you know, meaning in some way. And here I just want to read out this quote about, so it's not about like a romantic concept of love. It's not about, you know, being loving and everything will be fine. So I'm quoting Hugo Strandberg, who writes, "For love is not an attitude which it is possible to take up towards some objects and not others, drawing a boundary from whom I will be loving towards, is a threat also to those within it and therefore unloving to accord." End of quote. So in a sense, having a loving kind of relationality towards others, in a sense, is equal, because it's not about who the other is. It's about how you come to see them. And of course, then we come into terminology around forgiveness and these kinds of...
And can I add that you said in our discussions that I think this is a good summary, that it is a fantasy to think that we could ever be somehow completely equal or not have difference, but it's not a fantasy to treat each other in a way that we're striving to treat each other equally.
Yes. And this is also then goes back to indeed the abstract of this program, where it talked about allyship and union and solidarity as an active negotiation that is constant and ongoing. So we come back to the practice.
And I think one point that I often come back to in these situations of conflict is like, you know, we're all born into this world which is not out of our own making. So in a sense, you know, we're just thrown into this certain locality, and that's of course where we speak from. But in a sense, that locality is not of our own making. So I think that is where, in a sense, we all are equal, in the sense that you know, we come into this world the way we do, but that's not of our making. So I think that's kind of a good reminder to have when trying to make sense of what this, you know, kind of kind or loving attitudes towards the other could mean.
So we propose exploring more of relationality, suhteissa oleminen, suhteessa tekeminen. How do we relate to each other? What does that matter to forming unions? What does that matter to knowledge, truth, equality and politics.
And I think also to quote a teacher from Åbo Akademi, Camilla Kronqvist, it would be important to focus more on the who we are rather than the what we are, to bring it back to that level, and to go back to concepts of love and kindness and forgiveness and good relationality, good relations.
And of course, just to maybe end, this of course does not mean that we're not self-critical, we're not self-reflexive, but I think it's, if we want to get away from this kind of performative aspect of being a good person, then we have to also think about in what spirit we're engaging in these questions and in what spirit we're doing politics, to get out of this, highly polarizing, moralizing tendencies of, essentializing blame game.
Yeah, and I think one more point to add to this, and then we are done, is that, of course, having loving relations does not exclude the possibility of conflicts. Indeed, it is part of having loving relations to be in conflict, but it's a matter of how to have them, how to negotiate. Again, the difference is it's not about brushing away, but more about changing how we address them.
Thank you.
Thank you.